Imagine promoting your absolute best friend to be the chief financial officer of your company. You give them millions of dollars, complete access to your life, and, you set them up for absolute security.
Right. The ultimate dream scenario.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in return, after a night of heavy drinking, they literally cut your head off and parade it through the streets on a spike.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that isn't a metaphor. That is exactly what happened to Emperor Michael III. So today, we are unpacking the terrifying mathematical reality of why the people you trust the most are, statistically speaking, the most likely to destroy you, while the people you actively despise might actually be the key to your success.
It's an incredibly jarring premise, isn't it? I mean, we spend our entire lives being told that friendship is this ultimate safety net.
Yeah,
We
totally.
categorize our world so neatly, like friends go in the good and safe box and enemies go in the dangerous and bad box. But when you step into the actual unfiltered machinery of human ambition, that entire categorization system just completely collapses.
It totally collapses. And, we're talking directly to you, the listener, right now, because we know you aren't here for the polite, sanitized HR manual version of how the world works.
Right, the polished version.
Exactly. You're here for the actual mechanics of human behavior, even if those mechanics are, well, highly uncomfortable to look at. So we've compiled a stack of historical accounts, folklore, and strategic philosophy for this deep dive. And it all centers around one highly controversial rule of power. Never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's vital to understand that this isn't just a cynical, brooding take on companionship.
Yeah, it's not just friends are bad.
No, not at all. We are diving into a structural analysis of power, of gratitude, and, most importantly, of the human ego. It's an invitation to view your own networks, whether you're navigating corporate politics, a startup venture, or, even a local community board, through a highly pragmatic, slightly Machiavellian lens.
Right.
We have to look at why people behave the way they do when the stakes are high, rather than how we desperately wish they would behave.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the argument here isn't just a blanket statement, right? There's a very specific psychological mechanism at play. The premise is that friends are uniquely susceptible to envy when power dynamics shift. They become spoiled, they become tyrannical. Whereas a former enemy, if you deliberately bring them into your fold, has something to prove.
Exactly. And to really grasp the mechanics of that envy, we have to look at what happens when personal affection is fundamentally confused with professional competence.
Which brings us right back to the guy whose head ended up on a spike.
Yes, the tragedy of Michael III.
Right, the Byzantine emperor. We're heading back to the mid-9th century AD, and I need to set the stage here, because the Byzantine court wasn't just a tough place to work, it was a literal meat grinder.
Oh, absolutely.
It was an environment strictly governed by paranoia. Just to give you a sense of the baseline reality here, Michael is a young, completely inexperienced guy who has just assumed the throne. His mother, the empress, has just been forcibly banished to a nunnery.
Right.
Her lover was outright murdered in the palace. And the guy who orchestrated this entire bloody coup to put Michael on the throne, that was Michael's own uncle, a guy named Bardas.
Which tells you everything you need to know about the ecosystem Michael is operating in. I mean, family ties mean absolutely nothing when absolute power is on the line. Trust is the rarest currency in Byzantium.
Right. So Michael is looking around this incredibly perilous court, surrounded by intriguers and assassins, and he realizes he desperately needs a chief counselor. He needs a right-hand man he can, actually trust with his life.
Which makes sense.
It does. Now, the logical choice, the one recommended by literally every seasoned advisor in the empire, is his uncle Bardas. Bardas is brilliant, he's highly educated, he completely understands the Byzantine political machine, and, well, he actually got Michael the job.
But Bardas is also dangerously ambitious. He's a known quantity, but he's a shark.
Exactly. So Michael bypasses this highly qualified, highly intelligent uncle. Instead, he elevates his absolute best friend, a guy named Basilius. And here's where the story goes completely off the rails.
Oh, it really does.
Basilius isn't a politician. He isn't a general. He's a peasant from Macedonia whose current job is head of the royal stables. He's literally a horse trainer.
It's a staggering leap. Going from mucking out stalls to managing the geopolitical strategy of the Byzantine Empire. It defies all logic.
It does, until you understand the origin of their friendship. See, a few years prior, Michael was visiting the stables, a wild horse got loose, and it was about to trample him.
Oh, right.
Basilius leaps in, wrestles the horse to the ground, and saves the emperor's life. Michael is so overwhelmed with gratitude that he pulls this guy out of total obscurity. He makes him head of the stables, showers him with gold, sends him to the finest schools in Byzantium to learn how to read and speak like a noble. They become completely inseparable. Michael loved him like a brother.
It's the ultimate expression of unadulterated gratitude. Michael assumes that because he literally created Basilius's new life, he has purchased unshakable, eternal loyalty.
Let me put this in a modern context for you, the listener, because it's so easy to dismiss this as ancient history.
Yeah, people think this doesn't apply to them.
Exactly. So imagine you're driving to the most important pitch meeting of your life. You're about to ask for $50 million in venture capital to save your startup. On the way, your tire blows out on the highway. You're in a panic. You're wearing an expensive suit. Suddenly, your favorite drinking buddy, let's call him Dave, happens to drive by.
Good old Dave.
Good old Dave. He jumps out, gets completely covered in grease, changes your tire in record time, and gets you to the meeting with 5 minutes to spare. You nail the pitch, you get the $50 million.
A huge success.
Huge. And you are so overwhelmed with gratitude for Dave that the very next morning, you name Dave the chief financial officer of your tech company.
Despite the fact that Dave's only qualification is being a fun guy at a barbecue and knowing how to use a lug wrench.
Exactly. It's professional suicide. You are taking a moment of intense personal gratitude and using it to make a massive operational decision. And that's exactly the trap Michael fell into with Basilius.
And this is where we have to look at the psychological mutation that happens to Basilius, because Basilius actually learns the job. He's sitting in the council chambers advising the emperor. But the sudden exposure to the unbelievable wealth and power of the Byzantine court changes his fundamental chemistry.
He changes.
He becomes relentlessly avaricious. He never has enough money. He never has enough land.
And Michael's response to his buddy wanting more is just to give it to him. He doubles his salary, then he triples it. He makes him a noble. He even goes so far as to marry Basilius off to his own mistress, a woman named Eudoxia, just to keep him happy.
Wow.
Yeah. Michael's entire operating theory is like, keeping my best friend satisfied is worth literally any price.
Which brings us to the core conceptual framework of this entire dynamic, the heavy, often toxic burden of the unearned favor.
The unearned favor.
Yes. This is where the psychology gets really deep, and it's something we see in modern corporate environments all the time. As human beings, we have an innate, desperate desire to feel that we have earned our lot in life. We want to believe our success is due to our own merit, our own hard work, our own sheer intellect.
We want to be the hero of our own origin story. Nobody wants to be the sidekick who just got lucky.
Precisely. Now, what happens when someone is simply handed immense power, wealth, and status, not because they outworked everyone else, but simply because they happen to be in the right place at the right time and were well-liked by the boss? What happens when you're handed the CFO job just because you changed a tire?
Initially, there's probably genuine gratitude. Right, you're thrilled.
Initially, yes.
Yeah.
But over time, that charity becomes encumbering. It becomes a constant, silent, suffocating reminder that you are not a self-made person. You are a creation of someone else's generosity. Every time you look at the person who elevated you, you aren't seeing a friend anymore. You're looking at a mirror, reflecting your own inadequacy. And what many people do in this situation is subconsciously twist the narrative to protect their own fragile ego.
Wait, how so?
They begin to sort of forget the favors they received. They start convincing themselves they earned their success by their own undeniable brilliance.
Oh, wow. So they rewrite history in their own head.
Oh, yeah.
And worse, that unearned favor breeds a secret resentment toward the benefactor.
It absolutely does. It breeds a subtle condescension. The friend who was elevated starts to feel this burning need to prove they're actually bigger, smarter, and more ruthless than the person who put them there. The friendship is no longer a bond. It's a weight they want to violently throw off to prove they can stand on their own.
Which perfectly explains the terrifying escalation we see next with Basilius. Uncle Bardas, the guy Michael passed over for the job, is currently the head of the army. And Basilius starts whispering in Michael's ear. He starts pouring poison. He tells Michael, look, your uncle is hopelessly ambitious. He orchestrated a coup to put you on the throne, which means he knows exactly how to orchestrate a coup to get rid of you and take the crown himself.
Notice what Basilius is doing there. He's playing on Michael's baseline paranoia, but he's weaponizing the intimate trust of their friendship to make the lies believable. Michael thinks, Well, my best friend wouldn't lie to me about something this serious.
Right. And it completely works. Basilius convinces Michael to authorize the assassination of his own uncle. And the scene is incredibly cinematic. It goes down during a massive chariot race. The crowd is roaring, the dust is flying, the noise is deafening, and right there in the absolute chaos of the throng, Basilius closes in on Bardas and stabs him to death.
And then the very next day, Basilius casually asks Michael to replace Bardas as the head of the army.
Yeah.
Just to, keep the realm secure, of course.
Naturally. And Michael, completely blind to the monster he's built, just grants it. But the climax of this tragedy, the moment where the X-ray machine of who is a friend and who is an enemy shatters completely, happens a few years later.
This part is so revealing.
It is. Michael is actually in deep financial trouble because of his own extravagant spending. So he goes to his best friend, his brother, the guy he pulled out of the mud and gave literally everything to, and he asks him to pay back a fraction of the money he had borrowed over the years.
You think that's a completely reasonable request? Like, hey man, I helped you out, now I'm in a bind, spot me?
You would think. But to Michael's utter shock, Basilius refuses. And it isn't just a polite, oh, my money is tied up in investments. Kind of no. The historical accounts specifically highlight that Basilius gives him a look of absolute impudence.
That phrase, an impudent smile, is crucial. That is the mask completely falling off. That's the moment Basilius shows Michael that the power dynamic has entirely flipped. He's no longer the grateful peasant. He is the master.
It's the realization hitting Michael like a physical blow. He looks at this former stable boy, and he suddenly does the math. Basilius now has more money, more allies in the army, more allies in the Senate, and fundamentally more hard power than the emperor himself.
Michael created his own executioner by feeding an ego that couldn't bear the weight of its own unearned success. And what's truly tragic here is that even at this moment of stark realization, Michael still could have saved his own life.
Yeah, he was the emperor.
Exactly. He had the authority to have Basilius arrested or executed. But personal affection short-circuits our survival instincts. We desperately cling to the idea that nobody believes a friend can truly betray them to that degree.
And Michael went right on disbelieving it until the very end. A few weeks later, Michael has a night of heavy drinking, passes out, and wakes up to find himself surrounded by soldiers in his own bedroom. And standing right there, calmly watching them stab the emperor to death, is Basilius.
It's brutal.
And just to put the darkest, most brutal cap on this story, Basilius proclaims himself the new emperor, gets on his horse, and rides through the streets of Byzantium, brandishing Michael's severed head at the end of a long pike.
It's a horrific image, but it's the foundational anchor for this entire philosophy. The takeaway for the listener isn't that your college roommate is secretly plotting to mount your head on a pike in the break room.
Let's hope not.
Right. It's a prompt for deep self-reflection. Have you ever hired a friend or brought a close buddy into a startup only to find that the dynamic slowly became poisoned by hidden envy? Did they start taking liberties? Did they stop respecting your authority? The tragedy of Michael III proves that personal affection creates a massive blind spot to our own self-interest and physical or professional danger.
It's such a brutal pivot from a heroic rescue from a wild horse to a literal decapitation. And I think that jarring transition perfectly sets up the broader metaphorical theme we need to explore next. We're stepping out of the bloody history of Byzantium and moving into the realm of folklore and philosophy, specifically focusing on this terrifying concept, the jaws of ingratitude and the unbearable burden of kindness.
Because if we want to understand human nature, we can't just look at one Byzantine emperor and say, well, that was a unique situation.
Yeah.
We have to look at the recurring patterns of behavior that show up across different cultures and eras.
Right, which brings me to this incredibly dark African folktale about a snake, a farmer, and a heron.
I love this story.
It's so dark. The story goes like this. A snake is being actively hunted by a group of men. It's terrified, it's about to be killed, and it slithers up to a farmer and begs him for sanctuary. The farmer, being an empathetic, kind-hearted guy, actually squats down and lets the snake crawl into his own belly to hide.
Which is a brilliant, visceral metaphor for taking on immense, potentially lethal personal risk to help someone in a desperate situation.
Yeah.
You're internalizing their danger.
Exactly. So the hunters pass by, the danger is completely gone. The farmer taps his stomach and says to the snake, "Okay, buddy, coast is clear, you can come out now." But the snake refuses. It's warm, it's safe inside the farmer's belly, and it decides it's just going to permanently take up residence there.
The absolute, immediate exploitation of sanctuary. The moment the crisis passes, the gratitude vanishes,
Mhm.
and it becomes about extraction.
Right. So the farmer is walking home in absolute agony, terrified he has a live, venomous snake living inside him. He sees a heron standing by the road and whispers what happened to the bird. The heron is a smart bird. It says, squat down and strain as hard as you can to push the snake out.
Okay.
The farmer does. The snake pokes its head out of his mouth, and the heron, lightning fast, catches the snake by the head, yanks it out, and kills it. Life saved.
The heron acts as the perfect, highly competent third-party intervention. Problem solved.
But the farmer is still panicking. He asks the heron, wait, what if the snake's poison is still inside my system? I could still die. The heron, again trying to be incredibly helpful, says, don't worry, the traditional cure for snake poison is to cook and eat 6 white fowl. Do that and you'll be fine.
And this is where the raw, unfiltered reality of human nature rears its head.
The farmer looks up that heron, looks at its white feathers and says, you're a white fowl, you'll do for a start. He grabs the heron by the neck, shoves it into a burlap sack, and carries it home to boil it alive.
The sheer, breathtaking audacity of that action betrays a profound truth about how quickly fear and self-interest override any conceivable sense of gratitude. The heron literally just extracted a deadly serpent from this man's stomach minutes prior, and the farmer's immediate response to a brand new problem is to consume his own savior.
It actually gets worse. He gets home, hangs the bag up in the kitchen, and tells his wife the whole story. And the wife's reaction is the moral center of the tale. She is absolutely appalled.
As she should be.
She says, I am surprised at you. The bird does you a kindness, rids you of the evil in your belly, literally saves your life, and your first instinct is to catch it and kill it. She immediately unties the bag and releases the heron, and it flies away. But on its way out the door, the heron gouges out both of her eyes.
A truly dark, uncompromising ending that spares absolutely no one.
And the moral attached to this story is a proverb that I honestly haven't been able to stop thinking about. It says, when you see water flowing uphill, it means that someone is repaying a kindness.
Water flowing uphill. Think about the physics of that statement. It implies that true, lasting gratitude is a literal violation of the laws of nature. It's a complete anomaly.
That's depressing.
It is, but that is a staggering assertion about human psychology. It suggests that our default setting, when pushed, is not appreciation, but extraction and self-preservation. And if you look at the historical record, some of the most powerful leaders in history absolutely believed this. Consider King Louis XIV of France. He famously lamented, every time I bestow a vacant office, I make 100 discontented persons and 1 ingrate.
That is such a sharp, depressing, mathematical breakdown of leadership. If you think about that in a modern corporate context, let's say you're a VP and a director role opens up. You have 100 people who want that job. The moment you pick one person, you have instantly created 99 enemies who feel deeply slighted, passed over, and resentful. And the one person you did choose doesn't spend the next 5 years weeping with gratitude. They almost immediately feel entitled to the role. They feel they deserved it all along, making them, in Louis's words, an ingrate. It is literally a lose-lose situation for the leader.
It absolutely is. We also see this in the writings of Baldassare Castiglione, the Renaissance author. He wrote extensively about having been deceived the absolute most by the person he loved the most and whose love he was most confident in. He explicitly warns against trusting too much in what he calls this tempting trap of friendship.
Okay, I have to push back here. I really do. Because we are painting an incredibly bleak, cynical picture of humanity. Are you telling me that human nature is just inherently, biologically ungrateful? Are we all really just walking around waiting to gouge the eyes out of the person who saved us? I mean, I have friends I've known for 20 years who haven't betrayed me. Isn't it more accurate to say that the introduction of specific variables, namely power, money, and professional hierarchy, is what corrupts what was otherwise a perfectly pure and functional friendship? If Michael and Basilius just stayed bros who drank at the tavern and Michael never made him a politician, wouldn't they have been totally fine?
That is an excellent, crucial distinction to draw. And it's exactly where we need to focus. It's not necessarily that humans are inherently biologically evil. It's about the very specific high-pressure environment of work and power.
Right.
The fundamental argument here is that honesty rarely strengthens friendship. Think about your own close friends. How is that relationship actually maintained?
Right.
We constantly cover up their unpleasant qualities so as not to offend them. We agree to avoid sensitive topics. We laugh a little extra hard at jokes that aren't that funny.
We tell them we love their new screenplay, even if it's terrible.
Exactly. The foundation of many incredibly strong friendships is actually built on a very polite, mutually agreed upon fiction. We maintain a facade of unconditional support to keep the peace. But when you bring a friend into a working environment, a place where stakes are high, where revenue is involved, where critical, objective decisions have to be made, that polite facade cannot possibly hold. The sudden requirement for brutal, objective honesty shatters the illusion.
Oh, I see. You can't just politely nod when your best friend makes a disastrous financial projection for your company that could get everyone fired. You have to look them in the eye in front of a board of directors and tell them their work is terrible.
Exactly. And because the entire relationship was previously built on that polite fiction of unconditional support, that sudden professional honesty feels like a profound personal betrayal.
Wow.
When you hire a friend, it is your initial act of kindness that unbalances the entire dynamic. The friend feels a subtle touch of condescension in being hired because they are a friend, rather than because they are the absolute best candidate in the open market.
That makes total sense.
This leads to what we can call the slow leakage of injury. Small flashes of resentment, a slightly more biting tone in meetings, a flare-up of envy when you get credit for a project, and before you know it, the friendship is ruined and the business is suffering.
So if Michael III is the ultimate cautionary tale of exactly what not to do, if relying on friends is a trap that leads to your own decapitation, what is the alternative? How are you actually supposed to consolidate power, build a reliable network, and get things done?
That's the million-dollar caution.
This brings us to a historical narrative that is basically the exact inverse of Michael's disaster. If Michael is the disease, this next guy is the radical cure. We're talking about the sheer, counterintuitive brilliance of Emperor Sung.
This is one of the most fascinating psychological pivots in history.
Let's set the stakes here because they are incredibly high. The context is China, specifically in the year 959 AD. Now, for several centuries following the fall of the Han Dynasty, Chinese history was trapped in this endless, bloody, miserable loop. It was a systemic pattern of violent military coups.
A complete and total failure of systemic governance.
Exactly. The mechanism worked like this. A group of army generals would plot together and assassinate a weak emperor. Then they would take the strongest general among them and put him on the dragon throne. That general would start a new dynasty, crown himself emperor, and to ensure his own survival, what would he do? He would immediately turn around and murder all the fellow generals who just helped him get the job.
Which, if you think about it purely from a ruthless tactical standpoint, seems like an effective way to eliminate immediate threats. You kill the guys who know how to overthrow an emperor.
Right. Except it never worked long term. It only created a temporary vacuum. A few years later, a new crop of ambitious lieutenants and generals would rise up through the ranks, assassinate that emperor or his sons, and the bloody cycle would just start all over again.
It's just a constant cycle of violence.
It got to the point where being the emperor of China meant you were the most vulnerable, isolated man in the realm, permanently surrounded by a pack of wolves waiting for you to show a moment of weakness.
It's a fascinating paradox. The man sitting at the absolute pinnacle of the hierarchy, holding life and death power, is actually the least secure person in the entire empire.
So enter General Chao Kuangyin, who takes the throne and becomes Emperor Sung in 959. He's a brilliant, highly pragmatic guy. He looks at the last 300 years of history, he does the math, and he knows that mathematically, within a year or two, he is destined to be murdered by the very men who just helped him take power. He has to figure out how to break a pattern of violence that is deeply ingrained in the political culture.
And his solution is an absolute masterclass in psychological manipulation, vulnerability, and strategic foresight.
He organizes a banquet, he orders a massive, opulent feast to celebrate the new dynasty, and he invites all the most powerful commanders in the army. These are the exact men who, historically, are waiting for their chance to kill him. They eat, they drink a massive amount of wine, the atmosphere is loud and celebratory. And then Sung does something shocking. He abruptly dismisses all the imperial guards. He dismisses the servants. He empties the room until it is just the new emperor and his most dangerous generals alone behind closed doors.
I want you to imagine the sudden, terrifying drop in the temperature of that room. The ambient noise stops. The generals look around, see no guards, and they must have instantly thought, this is it. It's happening right now. This is the part where the new emperor murders us all in one fell swoop to secure his throne.
Because that's what always happens.
That is the established historical precedent. They are bracing for a bloodbath.
But instead of pulling out hidden swords, Sung addresses them with this incredible, disarming vulnerability. He looks at these hardened killers and says, "The whole day is spent in fear, and I am unhappy both at the table and in my bed, for which one of you does not dream of ascending the throne."
What's fascinating here is the radical transparency. He's naming the elephant in the room. He isn't pretending they are loyal friends. He is openly acknowledging their ambition instead of punishing them for it. He's saying, I know what you want because it's exactly what I wanted.
He goes on to say, "I do not doubt your allegiance, but if by some chance your subordinates, seeking wealth and position, were to force the emperor's yellow robe upon you in turn, how could you refuse it?"
That phrase, the yellow robe, is so deeply evocative. It represents the supreme power being thrust upon them, almost against their will, by the sheer momentum of ambition from the ranks beneath them. Sung is giving them a psychological out. He's saying, even if you don't want to overthrow me, your ambitious captains will eventually force you to do it.
The generals are absolutely terrified. They are drunk, they are fearing for their imminent execution, and they immediately drop to the floor, sweating, proclaiming their innocence, and swearing absolute undying loyalty to the emperor. But Sung has a different proposal.
Right.
He says, "The best way to pass one's days is in peaceful enjoyment of riches and honor. If you are willing to give up your military commands right now, I am ready to provide you with incredibly fine estates and beautiful dwellings where you may take your pleasure with singers and girls as your companions for the rest of your lives."
This is a massive turning point in Chinese history, and it's happening over a cup of wine.
The generals are utterly astonished. They walked into that room expecting a brutal fight to the death, an anxiety-ridden struggle for survival. Instead, Sung is offering them unlimited riches, absolute security, and a luxurious early retirement. The very next day, every single one of those powerful generals tenders their resignation. They retire as wealthy nobles to the country estates Sung gave them.
Let's really analyze the mechanics of what Sung achieves here, because it is brilliant. He fundamentally understood the difference between a friendly wolf and a docile lamb. He recognized that these generals, as long as they commanded armies, were wolves. They were dangerous, highly ambitious, and heavily armed. If he had just murdered them, as all his predecessors had done, what would happen?
More war.
He would only have bred vengeance. The sons, the brothers, and the lieutenants of those murdered generals would have risen up to avenge them. Violence inherently begets more violence.
But by bribing them, and let's call it what it is a magnificent state-sponsored bribe, he essentially bought his peace. He permanently removed their fangs. He turned a pack of wolves who were historically destined to betray him into a group of docile lambs, completely removed from any actual levers of military power, living out their days in luxury.
And the proof is in the results. It worked. He completely broke the centuries-old cycle of assassination. The Sung dynasty didn't just survive. It went on to rule China for more than 300 years.
But here is where it gets really interesting, because Sung didn't just neutralize active threats, he took it a step further. He actively converted bitter, defeated foes into fiercely loyal vassals. There are two incredible follow-up stories about this.
I love these stories.
A few years later, a rebel named King Lu of the southern Han finally surrenders to Sung after years of brutal warfare against the empire. Sung invites Lu to the imperial court in the capital to seal their newfound peace with a ceremonial glass of wine.
And King Lu, knowing the incredibly brutal history of imperial politics, hesitates. He looks at the glass of wine Sung is offering him, and his mind races. He is absolutely terrified it contains poison. It's the oldest trick in the book.
Lu is so scared he actually cries out, "Your subjects' crimes certainly merit death, but I beg your majesty to spare your subject's life. Indeed, I dare not drink this wine." And what does Sung do? Does he get offended? Does he have guards force it down his throat? No.
He does the unexpected.
Sung laughs. He takes the glass right out of Lu's trembling hand and swallows the wine himself. There was no poison. And from that exact moment, Lu realizes the emperor truly means him no harm, and he becomes one of Sung's most trusted and loyal allies.
It's a stunning display of trust that completely short-circuits Lu's paranoia.
Then there's the story of Qian Shu, another defeated king of a smaller splintered kingdom. Sung's own ministers are waving intercepted documents in the emperor's face, proving that Qian Shu is still actively conspiring to assassinate Sung. The ministers are begging Sung to lock him up or execute him immediately. But when Qian Shu comes to visit the capital, Sung does not arrest him, he honors him. He treats him like royalty.
It's so counterintuitive.
And as Qian Shu is leaving the city to go back home, Sung hands him a mysterious sealed package and says, "Open this when you are halfway home."
It's highly theatrical. It's a deeply calculated psychological operation.
Qian Shu gets halfway home, opens the heavy bundle, and his blood must have run completely cold. Inside the package are all the documents, all the secret intercepted letters detailing his own assassination conspiracy against Sung.
Imagine the psychological impact of that moment. In that instant, Qian Shu realizes two things simultaneously. One, the emperor knew absolutely everything. The conspiracy was completely compromised. And two, the emperor, having absolute undeniable proof and complete legal justification to execute him, chose to spare his life anyway.
The accounts say this act of immense generosity completely broke Chanshu's resistance, and he too became one of Sung's most fiercely loyal vassals.
And this brings us to the core mechanism of why this strategy is so profoundly effective. It goes back to the difference in baseline expectations between a friend and an enemy. A friend, like Basilius from our very first story, expects favors as a baseline reality.
Right.
When you give a friend a promotion or a gift, they feel they are owed it because of your personal bond. They think, of course I got a promotion, I'm the boss's best friend. And if they don't get more, they seethe with jealousy.
Oh, they feel entitled to your generosity?
Exactly. But an enemy who has been defeated on the battlefield or in the boardroom expects the guillotine. They expect to be fired, ruined, or killed. When that enemy is instead spared, when they are given a position, wealth, or merely allowed to keep their dignity, they expect nothing and receive everything. The massive contrast between what they feared, total destruction, and what they received, grace, generates an overwhelming, profound sense of gratitude.
It is the exact opposite of the toxic unearned favor. It is unearned mercy.
And if we look at the philosophy of Niccolo Machiavelli, he observed this exact phenomenon. Machiavelli wrote that princes, especially newly minted leaders trying to establish a foothold, actually find more usefulness and more fierce loyalty in the men they initially suspected or fought against than in the friends they first confided in at the beginning of their reign.
Wow.
An enemy who's been pardoned knows they are on thin ice. They have a massive debt to repay. They will go to the ends of the earth to prove that the leader's gamble on them was correct. They have something to prove.
Which perfectly transitions us to the next massive concept we need to explore. If Emperor Sung showed us how to neutralize and convert defeated kings, what does this look like when applied to modern history? What happens when you actively collaborate with someone who is currently actively your enemy? We are moving into the concept of the untapped gold mine of the enemy.
Because the underlying argument here is that enemies are not just obstacles to be violently removed. They are highly competent resources to be strategically exploited.
Let's look at the French conspiracy of 1807. We have Talleyrand, who is Napoleon Bonaparte's own foreign minister. Talleyrand looks around at the state of Europe and decides that Napoleon's endless maniacal wars are going to lead France to absolute ruin. He makes the incredibly dangerous decision that the time has come to turn against his boss, the most powerful man in the world.
A remarkably dangerous decision. Conspiring against Napoleon was a very quick way to face a firing squad.
Highly dangerous. So Talleyrand needs a partner. He needs a co-conspirator he can absolutely trust to execute a coup. And who does he choose? Does he pick his best friend, his closest confidant? No. He chooses a man named Joseph Fouché.
And we need to explain who Joseph Fouché is to understand the gravity of this choice.
Joseph Fouché is the terrifying head of Napoleon's secret police. He is also Talleyrand's most hated, bitter enemy. In fact, Fouché previously tried to have Talleyrand assassinated.
It is a breathtaking, almost incomprehensible choice.
Wait, let me stop right there because this is the part I struggle with. Fouché literally tried to have Talleyrand murdered. How does Talleyrand sleep at night knowing his co-conspirator in treason is a professional killer who already hates his guts? Isn't the risk of Fouché just betraying him to Napoleon 100 times higher than if he just hired a friend to help him?
That is the exact logical question everyone asks, but you have to look at the underlying mechanics of mutually assured destruction and mutual self-interest. Talleyrand knew that this relationship would be entirely 100% untainted by personal feeling.
I see.
There were no illusions of friendship. There was no polite facade to maintain. It relied entirely on cold, hard calculation.
Because they both deeply wanted Napoleon gone, and they both knew the other was ruthless enough to actually get it done.
Exactly. But there's an even deeper psychological lever Talleyrand was pulling. Fouché knew exactly how much Talleyrand hated him. So, by specifically choosing Fouché, Talleyrand was signaling immense, undeniable respect for Fouché's competence. He was saying, I hate you, but I know you are the only man competent enough to pull this off.
Oh, that's smart.
Fouché now had something to prove to Talleyrand. He had to prove that he was worthy of being selected for this grand, dangerous conspiracy despite their bloody history. When someone has something to prove to a rival, they will move mountains for you.
And while they didn't succeed in toppling Napoleon right at that exact moment, the sheer shock of seeing these two massive legendary enemies unite generated a ton of interest and slowly began to spread the seeds of opposition to the emperor. It was a highly fruitful, pragmatic working relationship.
It is the ultimate pragmatic alliance. You bury the hatchet with an enemy, not because you suddenly like them, but specifically to harness their unique aggressive skills and put them into your service.
We see an even more modern, perhaps even more bizarre application of this exact principle with Henry Kissinger in 1971.
This is during the absolute height of the Vietnam War. The United States is deeply, violently divided.
And Kissinger is basically public enemy number one for the anti-war movement. Now, in 1971, there was actually an incredibly bizarre, very real conspiracy to kidnap Henry Kissinger. And who was involved in this kidnapping plot? It was a group of renowned anti-war activists, specifically the Berrigan brothers, who were Catholic priests, along with 4 other priests and 4 nuns.
A high-level government kidnapping conspiracy run by radicalized priests and nuns. It sounds like a movie script, but it was a very real, documented threat.
So Kissinger finds out he is the target. What does he do? Does he demand the Justice Department arrest them all? Does he beef up his Secret Service detail and hide in a bunker? No. In private, without even informing the Secret Service, Kissinger arranges a Saturday morning meeting face-to-face with 3 of the alleged kidnappers.
He literally invites the people actively plotting to abduct him over for a morning chat. The sheer audacity required to do that is staggering.
He sits them down, and he completely unleashes a charm offensive. He treats them with respect. He explains his internal timeline, telling them he plans to have most American soldiers out of Vietnam by mid-1972. He engages with their arguments face-to-face, and the result.
It's wild.
The meeting ends with the would-be kidnappers laughing and giving Kissinger some of their Kidnap Kissinger protest buttons as a joke, and one of them actually remained a friend of his for years, visiting him on several occasions.
It is an audacious, brilliant maneuver, and it perfectly illustrates a legendary quote from Abraham Lincoln. During the American Civil War, Lincoln was giving a speech where he referred to the Southerners not as bloodthirsty monsters, but as fellow human beings who were in error.
And an elderly lady in the crowd viciously chastised him for it. She told him he should be calling them irreconcilable enemies who must be utterly destroyed.
Lincoln's reply is legendary, and it anchors this entire philosophy. He looked at her and said, "Why, madam, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?"
Do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends? That is profound. By converting them, you eliminate the threat just as effectively as if you had killed them, but you gain a powerful asset in the process.
And I want to pause here and ask you, the listener, to actively apply this to your own life right now. Think about your professional environment. Who is an active antagonist? Who is that person in another department who always pushes back on your proposals, or a rival in your industry who constantly undercuts you in meetings?
We all have one.
We all do. What would happen if instead of fighting them, complaining about them to HR, or avoiding them in the hallway, you deliberately engaged them on their own terms? What if you walked into their office, asked for their genuine advice, or brought them in on a project where their specific aggressive skills could be utilized? Could you convert your biggest headache into your strongest ally simply by acknowledging their competence?
It's a terrifying thought, reaching out to the person you like least in the office. It goes against every instinct we have. But as we have seen with Talleyrand and Kissinger, bridging that gap with an enemy can yield massive, unprecedented results. So Kissinger and Talleyrand proved that charming or utilizing an enemy works miracles.
Oh.
But what happens when an enemy is fundamentally uncharmable? What happens when you are facing an existential threat that absolutely refuses to sit down for a Saturday morning coffee? What if you shouldn't make an enemy your friend? So what does this all mean? This brings us to what I think is the most aggressive and counterintuitive stance we're exploring today. We need to talk about the crucible of constant conflict.
Up until now, the advice has been about converting enemies to neutralized threats. But this next perspective argues for the absolute biological and strategic necessity of keeping enemies as enemies, specifically to force yourself to stay sharp.
Let's look at Mao Zedong's strategy during the late 1930s. The context is 1937, and the formidable Japanese Imperial Army has just invaded China. Now, this massive invasion interrupts a bloody civil war that was already happening between Mao's communists and their domestic enemy, the Chinese nationalists.
A classic devastating two-front war scenario.
Right. And some of the communist leaders, looking at the sheer technological and military might of the Japanese army, advocate for a very logical conservative strategy. They say, let's back off. Let the nationalists fight the Japanese. They will exhaust each other. They will deplete their resources, and we can use this time to hide in the mountains, rest, and recuperate our forces.
Which, on paper, seems like the smart play. Let your two enemies destroy each other while you preserve your strength.
But Mao violently disagrees. He looks at the long game. He knows the Japanese, despite their power, cannot possibly defeat and permanently occupy a vast, sprawling country like China forever. Eventually, they will leave. And Mao argues that if the communist army sits out the war and hides in the mountains for several years, a terrifying biological and psychological process will occur. Atrophy.
Atrophy versus adaptation. This is the crux of it.
Explain that mechanism. How does fighting the Japanese actually help Mao?
Well, if Mao's army hides, they grow soft. Their logistics get rusty. Their command structure gets lazy. But Mao insists that fighting a formidable, highly disciplined foe like the Japanese is the absolute perfect training mechanism for his ragtag forces.
Okay, I see.
The Japanese army forces the communists to adapt, to learn guerrilla logistics, to harden their command structure under extreme duress. Mao forces his army into the crucible of conflict because he knows that extreme pressure is the only thing that forges a stronger weapon. By the time the Japanese finally retreated, the communist army had gained the intense, blood-soaked combat experience they needed to easily roll over the nationalists.
And there is a stunning postscript to this story. Years later, a Japanese visitor is meeting with Mao, and the visitor tries to formally, deeply apologize for his country's brutal invasion of China.
Mao's response is incredible.
He actually interrupts him. Mao says, "Should I not thank you instead?"
Mao explains to this bewildered visitor that without a worthy, terrifying opponent, a man or a group cannot possibly grow stronger.
It's a chilling, almost Darwinian view of conflict. It suggests that peace and comfort inevitably lead to atrophy, while struggle, friction, and opposition lead to evolution and strength. We can distill Mao's strategy into 3 distinct, highly applicable rules of conflict.
Let's break those down. What is rule number 1? Rule number 1 is purely strategic. Only pick fights you know you will eventually win. Mao knew, based on the sheer geography of China and the limits of Japanese supply lines, that the Japanese would eventually be defeated by the scale of the endeavor. He wasn't advocating for suicidal pitched battles. He was advocating for calculated resistance that served a larger evolutionary purpose for his army.
It's like picking a sparring partner who is tough enough to make you sweat and learn new defenses, but not a heavyweight champion who is going to knock you out and give you brain damage in the first round. Okay, what is rule number 2? Because this one is intense.
Rule number 2 states, if you have no apparent enemies, you must sometimes deliberately set up a convenient target, even going so far as intentionally turning a friend into an enemy.
Wow. Deliberately manufacturing an enemy just to have someone to fight. That sounds sociopathic.
It sounds extreme, but the underlying logic is profound. A state of prolonged peace makes any organization, a country, a corporation, a political party, lethargic. People get lazy, factions form, infighting begins. By inventing a crisis or clearly designating a rival, you instantly inject urgency, focus, and strict discipline back into your ranks. It unites your people against a common threat.
Which leads perfectly into the 3rd rule.
Rule number 3 is about optics and narrative. Use enemies to clearly define your cause to the public. You frame the conflict as a stark, existential struggle of good against evil. Mao actively encouraged aggressive disagreements with massive superpowers like the Soviet Union and the United States. He believed that without clear-cut, massive enemies looming on the horizon, his own people would lose any sense of what Chinese communism actually meant.
There's a great principle here. A sharply defined enemy is a far stronger argument for your side than all the words you could possibly put together. It's the psychological reality that humans often define themselves not by what they are for, but by what they are actively against.
Precisely. In the realm of power, the leader who welcomes conflict enhances his reputation as a sure-footed fighter. Enemies provide the essential friction necessary for forward momentum.
And enemies also provide something else that friends almost never, ever do. The unvarnished, incredibly ugly truth. I want to illustrate this with a delightfully gross anecdote from Plutarch about King Hiero of Syracuse.
It is a very grounding human story after all the grand military strategy.
It really is. So King Harrow is out one day, and he chances to speak with one of his bitter political enemies. And this enemy, trying to get under the king's skin, just bluntly insults him, yelling that the king has terribly stinking breath.
The deeply personal, humiliating insult.
The king is dismayed. He goes home, finds his wife, who is described as a simple, kind, and devoted woman, and he chides her. He says, "How does it happen that you never told me of this problem? I'm walking around embarrassing myself." And her response is incredible. She looks at him and says, "Sir, I had thought all men's breath had smelled so."
Think about the psychology of her response. She loved him deeply, so she completely normalized his flaw. She blinded herself to it to spare his feelings, or perhaps genuinely didn't recognize it as a defect because of her intense affection for him.
Exactly. The takeaway here is that faults that are evident to the senses, whether they are literal bad breath or massive metaphorical blind spots in a business strategy, we almost always learn about them from our enemies long before we hear about them from our friends and familiars.
Friends will happily let you walk around with stinking breath because they prioritize your immediate emotional comfort over your long-term improvement. Enemies do not care about your feelings. They are actively, relentlessly looking for the cracks in your armor. Therefore, they are the only ones who will point out your fatal flaws. By listening to your critics, your rivals, and your enemies, you are given the invaluable chance to fix those flaws before they destroy you.
The breath of truth, delivered exclusively by an enemy. It is a brilliant concept. But as we move into the final dynamic of this deep dive, things take a very dark, incredibly cynical turn. Throughout this entire discussion, the central thesis has been, keep friends away from power, work with the competent, and utilize your enemies.
But there is one highly specific, incredibly ruthless reversal to this law. There is one distinct scenario where a friend is actually vastly more useful than an enemy.
And it is not for a heartwarming reason. We're talking about the concept of the expendable friend.
In the realm of power, whether it's a medieval royal court or a modern corporate hostile takeover, duty work often needs to be done. Unsavory tasks, highly risky maneuvers, ethically gray decisions. A leader often needs these things accomplished, but for the sake of their own public appearances and reputation, it is absolutely essential to have someone else do it for them.
And the argument here is that a friend is uniquely suited for this dirty work. Why? Because their genuine affection for you makes them willing to take massive personal risks they otherwise wouldn't. They want to help you out of a jam. They want to be the hero for their buddy.
And furthermore, what happens if those highly risky plans go disastrously awry? What happens when the public finds out or the board of directors launches an investigation?
You need a scapegoat.
Precisely. You need a highly convincing fall guy. And this is where we see the historical trick known as the fall of the favorite. Kings and sovereigns would frequently let their absolute closest, most beloved friend at court take the entire blame for a massive failure or a deeply unpopular policy.
Because it creates the perfect bulletproof alibi. Think about the optics. If a known enemy takes the fall for a crime, the public instantly assumes the king framed them. It looks like a setup. But if the king's best friend goes down in flames for the crime...
Nobody questions it.
Right. The public will rarely believe that a leader would deliberately, cold-bloodedly sacrifice their closest companion. It makes the deception entirely convincing. The public thinks, wow, the king must be heartbroken to arrest his best friend, but justice is truly blind. Meanwhile, the king just used his best friend as a human shield to survive.
It is the coldest calculus imaginable. You leverage the public's naive romantic belief in the sanctity of friendship to perfectly disguise your own extreme ruthlessness.
I have to say, I'm reacting to the sheer sociopathy of this right now. It is incredibly dark, and there is a strict warning if you ever decide to play this card. It says, of course, after you play that card, you have lost your friend forever.
Yes, you cannot use someone as a human shield to absorb a career-ending scandal and expect them to come over for a barbecue the next weekend.
Right. So the tactical advice is, it is best then to reserve the scapegoat role for someone who is close to you, but not too close.
It requires a level of emotional detachment that is deeply difficult for most normal people to maintain. And that brings us to the final overarching warning regarding this entire law of power. If you absolutely must work with friends, if you cannot avoid starting a business with your buddy or hiring a college friend, absolute rigid boundaries are essential.
You have to be careful.
You cannot let your guard down for a second. You must be constantly vigilant for those subtle signs of emotional disturbance we talked about earlier. The small flashes of envy, the sudden lack of gratitude, the quiet, creeping condescension.
Because nothing is stable in the realm of power. The dynamics are constantly shifting under your feet, and a best friend can become your worst, most lethal enemy overnight.
Just ask Michael III.
Exactly. Just ask the guy whose head ended up on a pike. Let's rapidly synthesize the immense ground we have covered today. We started with the tragic, fatal trust of Emperor Michael III, who handed the keys to an empire to a horse trainer out of misplaced personal gratitude and paid for it with his life.
We explored the deeply ingrained human tendency toward ingratitude, illustrated by the farmer who tried to boil the heron that saved him, reminding us that the receipt of an unearned favor often breeds deep resentment and a desire to destroy the benefactor, rather than loyalty.
We marveled at the strategic brilliance of Emperor Sung, who broke a centuries-old cycle of bloody assassinations not by fighting his enemies, but by bribing them with immense riches, turning dangerous wolves into docile lambs.
We analyzed Talleyrand's unholy, highly effective alliance with his would-be assassin Fouché, and Henry Kissinger's sheer audacity in having a friendly chat with his own kidnappers, proving that mutual self-interest and competence with an enemy is often stronger than the fragile, easily bruised egos involved in a friendship.
We looked at Mao Zedong throwing his army into the crucible of conflict with the Japanese, using a terrifying enemy as a vital training mechanism to prevent his forces from atrophying and growing weak.
And finally, we examined the brutal, cold utility of the scapegoat friend, the dark reversal that suggests affection can be weaponized when a leader needs a highly convincing fall guy.
It is a massive amount of psychological machinery to process. But how does this apply to you, the listener, tomorrow morning?
I want to remind you that while you are likely not ruling over a Byzantine empire or navigating a massive 20th century civil war, the core human dynamics we've discussed are universal. The mechanics of human ego, the heavy, suffocating burden of unearned favors, and the clarifying, sharp power of a true rival apply directly to your boardroom, your startup venture, or your community organization.
Right.
The ultimate lesson here is one of rigorous categorization. Keep your friends for friendship. Enjoy their company. Soften the harshness of the world with them. But when it comes to power, execution, and professional survival, well, work with the highly skilled and the competent, regardless of how you feel about them personally.
Which leaves us with one final lingering question to mull over. We started this deep dive talking about that clean, comforting X-ray of relationships, the simple, binary idea of friend versus enemy. But based on everything we have unpacked today, if extreme competence, brutal honesty, and mutual self-interest are actually the truest, most reliable foundations of loyalty in the real world, does that mean our enemies are actually our most honest and authentic relationships?
It is a profound, unsettling thought. Are our rivals and critics the only ones who truly see us clearly without the filter of polite fiction?
And conversely, are our friendships, the relationships we prize the absolute, most actually just pleasant illusions built on fragile egos, unearned favors, and polite lies that will instantly fall apart the second the stakes get too high?
Think about who really tells you the truth tomorrow.
We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the hidden, sometimes highly uncomfortable machinery of human power dynamics. Until next time, keep your eyes open, value your critics, and maybe double-check who is holding the ladder for you.